My perspective on data collection and interventions is that we actually ought to build evaluations that have that bias in it, a bias toward action, so that there is no real objectivity.
So basically, Michael is the guru when it comes to evaluation, I would say. And I'm super honored to have you here. Thank you, Michael, for being with us.
Happy to be with you. It's an important topic.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so let's talk about evaluation and games. My question is, games in general. Michael, do you play games? Have you ever played a game that you would call like your favorite game?
Well, it turns out that my oldest son is a gamer and develops games. Very much into it. In fact, he's working on a major game right now that he hopes would go commercial. So we've had lots of discussions about games. He does some tournament games and is very much a gamer. So I've learned a lot from talking with him.
Nice. And you yourself, have you played like games like when you were like in your past?
I've evaluated several outward bound programs that I participated in that used what were called new games, that are cooperation games, learning games, leadership games. And I've built some of those into my own training experiences. And I find that using games and experiences for people, I've had some of them go bad when they didn't work out the way I thought they would. But then my mantra is it's always data. So when then you've got stuff to process. I was doing an evaluation webinar, training, not webinar, face-to-face, and I knew I had a blind participant. I was going to be 20 participants. One of them was blind. So I designed an exercise where everybody got into a straight line and they had to form a perfect square, and everybody had blindfolds on.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started the exercise and the blind participant began giving them directions, and everybody shouted him down and said, no, you have an advantage. You can't tell us what to do. So my effort to empower him ended up, everybody shut him down and he felt very bad about it. So we ended up processing that, and it was a great opportunity for people to talk about how they approach games and learning experiences and the power dynamics of who has advantages in games. It brought up all the stuff, but in the opposite way than I expected.
Okay, nice example. Yeah. I mean, okay, so this means that you are already using kind of, game scenarios also in your training activities. But normally your training activities are about evaluation. And
Right.
Since you are very prominent for this, I would love also to share like your expertise on this topic. So if you would be so kind and give us like a 3 to 5 minutes pitch on your vision, like how can we adapt evaluation and impact measurement systems to this very fast changing world? So what is your vision for it?
The first thing I would say, and I appreciate the opportunity, Philip, is that evaluation typically gets treated as an add-on, an external independent activity. But the approach that I think actually makes sense, especially with regard to what you're doing, but more generally, is that evaluation ought to be embedded in the way of doing the work. It shouldn't be an add-on. It should be a part of the process, and that it should provide real-time feedback, and that it shouldn't be separated from the activities, but become part of the activities. So that I think one of the great potential advantages of evaluation that is built into gaming is that the results of the game itself ought to give feedback about success and failure, what got learned, what people took away from it, and the potential for longer term impact evaluation would be to treat that as an extension of the game itself, so that the people who are involved in whatever the learning activity is that becomes a part of game, that there's an extension of the game process that includes their participating in and examining their own ways in which they use the learning for impact, and that becomes part of an extension of the game itself. People reporting on what they have done with it. One of the interesting, let me be concrete about this. When I've done leadership training with people and networks with evaluation, if we set up a process where people in 3 months are going to report what they have done with the training and agree that everyone is going to see that, and that we create some rubrics about things that they could do with it, that creates a motivation for people to do something with the training because they want something to report. And so, in a sense, instead of it being an anonymous follow-up of the usual kind where people simply say it was valuable or not valuable, I did something with it, I didn't. If you know that your name is going to be attached to the follow-up and that you're going to be applying some rubric of what you did with the training and the activity, and everybody else is going to see that, that creates an incentive to have something to report and to actually do something with it. And because people know that folks are going to be judging those submissions, it becomes competitive.
Yeah. So basically, we can within the evaluation, we can also make use of different game mechanics that are out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that there's a very nice interplay to think about how to embed evaluation and evaluative thinking into the gaming process, not make it an independent external follow-up thing, but make it part of the way that is connected to the gaming itself. Nice. And the impact can be picked up that same way.
Okay, yeah, let's also speak about impact. So I will give you, let's brainstorm about it a little bit, and I will give you like an introduction how I normally, implement like projects in international cooperation regarding gamification or serious games. So basically what we're doing at the very beginning is we have, the different targets that we want to achieve with an activity. Normally like a gamified system or a serious game is kind of supporting other activities. So it's not, one only, the only format, but it's supporting different other activities. And we have a different target that we want to achieve. We have a target group that we are analyzing. Then we have the context that we're analyzing. So also not only what is the literacy, the digital literacy, depending on if it's like an analog or digital game, but also, what is the culture and the context that we want to apply that gamified system or game into. So different cultures are also differently motivated in a different way, basically, we found out. And afterwards, we are basically going into the design phase. So we're designing this gamified system or the serious game. We're testing it along the way directly with the different people from the target group, like with a smaller circle, and then iterating throughout the development phase. And then we're implementing the game and putting it into, the public. So either uploading it to different stores or implementing the training activities, whatever it might be, and then from this point, we will start the evaluation. So once the thing is online or once the training has started, then we're doing the evaluation. And then at the end of it, when like the project duration is over, we're checking, was it a success? Yes or no? I don't know, perhaps we could improve this process, and perhaps we could think about how else we could do like impact measurement, especially when it comes to, you know, uploading a game to the App Store or something like this, or any store that is out there. And then checking, you know, the numbers of downloads and so on and so forth. But how can we really measure the advantage and the added value of this activity, not only on the individual, but also on a group of people or even an entire society?
So first, let me suggest that the evaluation doesn't just start when you've got it uploaded, that all of that developmental work is also evaluation, and that it becomes important to capture the lessons you've learned about the game itself in the development phase, so that all of that development work, the feedback, the iterations that you go through before you have it ready to upload, that part of the learning is where you're actually articulating the theory of change, where you're getting a sense of what the impact might be and what you hope for it to be. So when I say embedded evaluation in the whole process, that it's ongoing. You're simply changing the nature and level of evaluation when you get to the stage of formally uploading it and people beginning to use it. But if you've been doing evaluation all the way along, formally harvesting the lessons, tracking, for example, changes you make in the game, tweaks you make in it, improvements, things you decide to leave behind, those decisions, those all provide direction for the kind of impact that you would hope to have. And so then when you've got the actual game uploaded, anything that is app-based has the potential, it seems to me, both to provide you with utilization kinds of information for the individual players and what they're doing with it, but to include in the game itself places where you ask them questions about who else they're engaging with and what the ripple effects are of the game. So that imagine that you build in some kind of animated part of the game that shows different impact pathways, and that they identify which of those pathways, if any of them, they have pursued, talking about things with other people, doing things with other people, creating a project. And so if you created within the game where they get to a certain level in the game, and then you have a pause that asks them what they have done or are going to do with what they have learned, and you give them some trajectories to follow about what that would look like, and that's automatically fed back to you through the app. You've got real-time data about how people are both doing the impact. But here again, what I'm suggesting is that building in the idea that they try to have impact becomes part of the game. So if you did that scenario, so they played a certain part of the game, and then there comes this pause where you say, so let's look at what you would do with what you've just experienced. Would you talk to other people about it? Is there some action you would take? Is there a project that you might take on? And that they follow that track. Well, that very exercise places in their mind the idea to do something with what they've learned. And then you check back with them at a later time about whether or not they've done that. And you've got built-in data in the app itself that tells you what people are doing with it and what kind of impact it's having.
Very nice, because it goes hand in hand with one system that I'm normally trying to integrate. And I would love to hear your opinion on this, because I will also share one challenge that we are facing there. So I call it the real life challenges. And basically, when you're playing a game, you're in a magic circle. You're within that circle. You can you can do anything without consequences in the real world. This means that you can fail and try and again and fail and try again until you master a challenge, but you can also behave like a person and behave as another person and behave like you wouldn't behave in the real world, basically. Yeah. Right. So we have to be super careful with measuring, the data that we are collecting to see, is this person really like a bad guy now because he or she behaves like a bad guy in the game or not. So that's number one. So the bias basically of being someone else in the protected environment. And number two is, from time to time, I'm giving them this kind of real life challenge where I kick them out of this magic circle and ask them, okay, now you learned about advantages or easy fixes in schools in space, in this magic circle. Now I kick them out and tell them, the target group is Yemeni people, for instance. How could you improve your school system with 3 easy steps? So I kick them out of the scenario, out of the magic circle, and trying to ask them and reflect on the content that they're going through in their own environment, asking them to do something in order to report back to the magic circle, telling them, if you're solving this real life challenge and give me 3 ideas from your side, then you can proceed in the game itself. So we're trying to push people to reflect on the learning content from that magic circle and apply it in their real setting. However, here comes now the big bias. The motivation of the people that are doing this exercise outside of the magic circle might be intrinsically motivated. Yes, I want to share the problem. I want to follow this epic meaning and I want to, contribute to it. But the other thing could be also that they're just extrinsically motivated in order, they need to do this in order to continue and progress in the game itself. So the evaluation aspect of it would be biased. What do you think?
The bias is actually motivating them towards action. So that, but my perspective on data collection and interventions is that we actually ought to build evaluations that have that bias in it, a bias toward action, so that there is no real objectivity when you're doing these kind of things. You're going to have to put up with people who are looking for evaluation data who are going to raise these questions. But in fact, what you're doing with gaming is using the bias toward action, the bias toward competition, the bias towards being part of a group, the bias towards continuing to play the game. One can use the word bias about all those things, but they're also incentives. So every time we take action, there's bias involved. We're operating on certain values. We're operating on certain incentives. So there is no bias-free action. The question is what the biases are, and you're being very explicit. There's a bias about continuing to play the game, but built into that is, in order for people to continue to play the game, they have to engage in a certain kind of thinking, and there's learning involved in that. So keeping people in the game and keeping them continuing is part of the outcome from an evaluation perspective, short term, to the extent that as this unfolds, it turns into not just possible things they might do conceptually, but you get to a stage where people begin to take action that they're reporting back. That's also an incentive to have things to report, as I said earlier. So that I don't worry about the nature of the fact of bias. It's being explicit about the bias, the incentive, the motivation that people have, the perspective that they bring to it, and having people reflect on that.
Mm-hmm. And this now we're kind of in the short term dimension, basically. Perhaps you also have some insights, you know, like it is very similar also sometimes to a training activity, right? So like playing a serious game, going through a gamified system can be compared to, you know, going to through a face-to-face training or online training, doesn't matter. So normally what we are seeing there is that we're having, you know, high activity and a big impact on the short term, but how can we measure those ripple effects, you know, that you were talking about, like on a later stage, because it's very hard for us game designers and serious game designers, in order to prove that this did a change, and we have ripple effects that are very indirect, but perhaps
I think that's where you think about extending the game beyond its normal closure, that there is built into the game a check-in in a month where people provide that additional information about what they have done. But instead of doing that in traditional evaluation forms and evaluation language, that you treat it as the next phase of the game. So they're moving outside the magic circle. You say you're going to now take the game into the real world and see what you've done with it. And you create the contributions back to the next level of the magic circle about what they've actually done with the game. So you use the game's language, the game's thinking, the game's concepts for follow-up, never mentioned in evaluation, never talking about this as an evaluation exercise, but talking about it as the next stage of the game. What have you done out in the real world from the magic circle? And what can you report back to us, including, I think it would be intriguing by way of learning to have a follow-up system where people get points for failure.
Mm-hmm.
So that they're both getting points for doing something, but to acknowledge that they tried something and that it failed, and that they have an insight about why it failed. If people can identify a learning, so let's say the lowest level of points is simply saying, I tried something and failed. Then I tried something and failed, and here's why it failed. You get more points. And then why it failed and how I would do it differently next time, that's a higher level point. So that to go through the process of recognizing I failed, this is why it failed, and here's what I've learned from that I would do differently. If you do all three of those, you get a bunch of points.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so very nice. I'm always hesitant, you know, with adding too much points to a system where we want to have, there's something called the over-justification effect. And basically this one is saying that extrinsic motivation can kill intrinsic motivation. So if I, for instance, paint a picture and you give me, you know, I just love to paint, and then you give me $5 for it, like my creativity will be reduced, and I will, you know, I will just paint for it because of the money. So the extrinsic motivator, you know, is killing my intrinsic. And then if you take back the money offer, so, you know, like I painted 5 pictures for you, and then you don't give me any more money for having a new picture, then my initially existent intrinsic motivation will be killed on a certain, you know, amount of time, for a certain amount of time. So the thing is, we have to be careful with, you know, giving extrinsic motivators like points to something. And this is something that I would love to ask you, is this kind of reflection, this kind of self-evaluation. Are people intrinsically motivated to do this, or do they always do this because of a certain reason that kind of?
I actually think it's that you're over dichotomizing intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. We're not one or the other. It's always some combination.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to describe is a extrinsic part of motivation where the intrinsic motivation is to continue to be part of the group, to
Mhm.
continue to play the game and to learn what others are learning. So that one of the things that we have found in doing these kind of follow-ups where people report what they've done by name and share that is that people are both intrinsically motivated to do something, but they're extrinsically motivated um, to look good. They want to have things to report, and that feeds on the intrinsic motivation. And unless you continue to play the game, unless you report things, you don't get to find out what other people reported.
Mhm. Mhm.
So what if it's not points in, the payoff is if
Mhm.
you submit something to people, you get to see what other people have submitted,
Got
and
it.
that you're becoming part of a community, so that in it moves from being individual intrinsic and extrinsic to playing upon our social intrinsic motivation, being part of a group, contributing to the group, being recognized by the group. Those are social motivations that go beyond the individual intrinsic and extrinsic
Yes.
motivation. And that's what I mean by continuing to play the game, is that if you've built some social affinity among people in the game playing, and that they have an interest in learning from each other as a community of practice, that's the way you get the follow up.
Very good. No, that's really nice. One thing I would also one problem I want to raise and discuss with you is the following. Now we are speaking about, like, groups and being part of a group, which definitely works quite well when we're having, for instance, face-to-face trainings, or like a smaller amount of people that are gathering, from time to time in the magic circle or outside of the magic circle. But sometimes we're also in these projects, we're aiming to basically shoot this project to as many people as possible without having check-in times from time to time. So we're delivering the product to a lot of different people, and then we're trying to get them on board. And yes, there's community building that is taking place, and we're trying to create a community and wrap the community around this product. But of course, it's harder to refer back to an individual, and this individual wants to be part of this group because it's very anonymous and big, the big wide internet, basically.
Right. Well, I think there you're into all of what is emerging around social media and crowdsourcing. And so it's one of the directions that our world is moving that is very much on the leading edge, is that subgroup of people who like being part of the universe, who want to be part of whatever that collective crowd is, and they contribute for all the reasons that people contribute to social media, which is a mixed kind of motivation. And at that point, you can anticipate some both positive and negative consequences of people becoming part of the crowd. But I think that the that sense that people are part of something larger than themselves, and that they're learning from each other and contributing. You're going to have, as you know, you're going to have some people who are quite active in such groups, and then you're going to have a lot of lookers on who are just taking things in and that you don't hear from. But I think that the way the technology is unfolding is that you're actually able to track how many of those lookers on there are, how much they actually stay with the process, how much they're tracking with it. I've been impressed with. I started doing YouTube videos, and the analytics that come out of YouTube are amazing. They tell you exactly how long somebody's watched something, what frame they stopped watching it on, how fast they skip through, how many people are doing that. And people look at each other's analytics to decide what to look at. So that process kind of feeds on itself. And I think that when you get into the taking the games into that larger mass, you're in the social media world and what's being learned about that. A lot of research going on around that.
Yeah.
So you'd be combining what you're learning from gaming with social media, crowdsourcing, those new directions.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, thanks a lot. A lot of new insights, thoughts, things to think about. Any as a last statement, do you think we should use games, educational games, serious games, gamified systems in international cooperation? Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. I think we have to use every asset and resource available. We're in major crisis here, and we actually the nature of the very things you're talking about, the social media, the large scale games that are going on, that people are, I've got grandsons and granddaughters, all of them are doing online gaming. So it's a generational thing. It's my generation is not going to be doing that, but the new generation, that's their world. When you look at millions of people playing these games, Minecraft and building cities and all of that, there's a psychology, there's a mentality there that is hugely important, and it's happening around the world with people in developing countries having access to the internet and the ways that that's changing. So I think the one thing to watch for, Philip, and this is relevant to evaluation. You heard me say I would suggest that when you do the follow-up kind of things I'm talking about, that you not use the word evaluation, because that carries baggage with it. The word game carries baggage as well. So that part of what you're doing for certain subgroups that will be really attracted to the gamification piece. Other subgroups, policymakers and types, may find the language of gaming off-putting. So the alternative kind of language that's out there strategically is to describe what you're doing as complex scenario building, as teaching people to deal with scenarios and contingencies. And so that when you're dealing with a policymaking community, the transition to gaming and funders and people who may not be there and not understand what the large internet gaming activities are, that you have some backup language that describes what you're doing in terms of the things that they're doing, which is scenario building. Davis is all about, they're actually running games, but they don't call them games.
Yes.
They call them scenarios. And they attach probabilities to them, and they argue about what the Bayesian probabilities are of certain kind of outcomes. This conference I was just out of the poly crisis, there was 100 people there about whether humanity is going to survive, and the issue rapidly become not whether civilization was collapsed, but how soon. And so it was a game. There were people who were, people were kind of bidding on each other. There are people who don't think we're going to make it to 2030. There were folks who think we're going to make it to 2050. And the outliers were saying they thought civilization would make it to 2100. But that the long-term, nobody thought there was a good long-term prognosis. And so the discussions were really kind of playing off of probabilities. What's the evidence of these? What are the consequences of this? So I just say that to suggest that politically you have some other marketing language that you can wrap around parts of this for the older funders who aren't yet at understanding the nature of gamification and what the younger generation is doing with it.
I see. Wonderful last words. Thank you so much, Michael. for being
Great.
here with me.
Great to catch up with you.
Yeah, no, it was really nice, and I hope also our audience enjoyed this talk, and yeah, your experience on the topic and your thoughts on it. So very much appreciated. Thank you so much for being with us today, and yeah, have a nice day. Speak to you soon.